There we
Hi.
go.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We haven't talked in a while. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. You may hear my dog a lot. There's a lot of activity outside, and all the dogs are going bananas.
Yeah, yeah. With these, have you been around the fires at all?
No, just the wind, but I do want to call out, the firefighters in the community. I've been watching, social media, and everybody's pulling in together in efforts and trying to save animals, offering their homes, offering their land, and man, my heart goes out to everybody. I feel really bad.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. Yeah, just to shout out to everyone, sending love to everyone who's going through this, and thank God for our first responders.
Yes, absolutely. And this is, well, that's for my other channel, my other YouTube, but this is part of what's happening, as a collective, and it's now we need to really come together, which is my main point. We need to really come together and help each other out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a great topic for that. We're talking about
Mhm.
spiritual awakening. What is spiritual awakening? I guess we could add to that title, how can it help us? How do we use it? And I think a really good place to start with spiritual awakening is to define it. And a lot of times I look up definitions of the words, but I'd rather just kind of go off the cuff and tell you my definition, and then you can tell me your definition,
Okay, let's
if
do
that
it.
works.
Yep.
So spiritual, what I would call spiritual is that which is not material, that which in our experience has to do with anything that doesn't have to do with our senses, our emotions, anything material, our thoughts. So it's the part of us that isn't material, that isn't physical, and that isn't anything that comes in a form, which includes thoughts. So it's that which is not material. And awakening is to become aware of, I would say, to be able to know and to integrate into one's life. That's what I would call spiritual awakening. So it's awakening to this mystery that we are prior to thoughts, feelings, anything that's physical, and awakening to that realization of who we are. That's what I would say.
Nice. Okay, so here's my version of it. So my version is you have either a very enjoyable circumstance or you have a very traumatic circumstance, whichever one it is, that gets you to start thinking questions beyond yourself. Am I really supposed to be here? What am I doing with myself? Am I happy? Am I um, um, why are others looking at me this way? Why am I being treated this way? Or this was the most amazing experience I have ever had in my life. Why can I not experience this bliss all the time? It is the questions that trigger your curiosity to take it to another level. And that's where the spirituality comes in, because you don't, what you, I didn't know what spiritual awakening was. People call it a midlife crisis, right? So something that gets you thinking outside of the box and you start asking questions that you would not have normally asked yourself. And then you become more aware of what's your surrounding, what you are doing with your life. And that opens up the world of the inexplicable, of the unknown that you start to
Okay.
experience.
So how would you define spirit?
The same as you, the unknown, going more with an intuition of what feels right, and you start listening to your inner guidance more.
Yeah.
To me, that's spirit.
Yeah. So here's what I would say, and we're gonna have a fun dialogue about this, I think. I I would say that all of our misery, our suffering comes from our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And thoughts show up as emotions in our body. So it's not what happens, it's how we interpret what happens. And we interpret what happens through our thoughts, and we experience them on in a disturbance in our body, and it's part of us, the experience of being alive to experience emotions. So we are identified, most of us are completely identified with our thoughts, and we believe each thought that goes through our mind is the absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
And because we believe each thought that goes through our mind, we are lost in this interpretation of reality. And not only are we identified with our thoughts, but we're identified with this idea that our thoughts, this narrative about ourselves, that our thoughts weave about ourselves. And we spend a large part of our lives, most of us, upholding this interpretation of who we are, this story of who we are that needs to be um, accentuated as a separate individual. That if I can't be the best of the best, I will be the worst of the worst. So we're defending and grasping. We're trying to push away and we're trying to get throughout our lives unnecessarily, and that's what causes the suffering. So it's, I would say that identifying with the material, which is I am me, I'm this body, that's all I am. And every thought that goes through my mind is the truth. And I believe that these thoughts that go through my mind are who I am. And that is what causes our suffering. And to get out of that is spiritual awakening, is the awakening to what is beyond our thoughts. That's what I would say. Tell me what you would say.
Um, I think all of that is true. I think all of that leads up to, I think what you and I are both saying, but we're saying from it's the same thing, but just different perspectives. And so we can agree on that we have been told, whether from childhood or maybe through, through career or whatever, that, that we're a certain way. We've created an identity based on this belief that we have in what we think of ourselves, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so therefore what we believe is what we're going to project. So if I'm feeling low self-esteem, it's because my outside is showing me, I'm interpreting it as I'm not worthy of something, so therefore I'm going to project the low self-esteem, right? So then when you have those thoughts are in your mind that create your identity, which are false, right? And so we need to figure out, how do we know, at what point do we know that those thoughts are false?
So the beginning of spiritual awakening, I would say, is to disidentify from the mind. That's the essence of what meditation is about, is to not believe what we're doing when we're, if we have a mantra, if we, and it could be just a focal point, we focus on our breath, or if we go back to a certain word or phrase, or if we are just trying to be here in the present moment and we're bringing our attention back to the present moment. Whatever it is, we are disidentifying from our thoughts. So the beginning of awakening from what causes maybe all of our suffering, if not most of it, which is our mind, is to disidentify from that thinking, meaning we don't believe every thought that goes through our mind. So it's basically take a deep breath. I'm here in this moment. I'm aware. There are thoughts right now that are causing suffering. And here I am being aware of the thoughts. And this is the thought that's going through my mind. And I'm not believing it as the only reality there is. There's something deeper than my thoughts. And that is the awareness that I am. And that is really the beginning of starting to experience the non-material, which is awareness, it's knowingness, it's that sense. It's not all there is, but it's that sense that I am here prior to I think this or I think that. Therefore, I feel this and I feel that with my emotions.
But before we get there, right? Like I went to the school of hard knocks. I did not know about this part. So it just happened to me that I triggered myself. I triggered my own thoughts and started questioning my own existence. So for somebody who didn't have the resources or didn't know about the resources or didn't look into the resources like myself, how would that person know, or how would they go about it? Like what would trigger them to go into this path of spiritual enlightenment
Suffering,
or spiritual awakening? So
suffering.
you're saying that, and I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with you. It actually ended up happening in my case where I'm like at the very bottom. I feel like I'm at the very bottom. Nothing else can go wrong. And I'm just like, I have nothing else in my life going on. What else can go wrong? And that's where my transformation happened. And I think it's kind of what happened to you as well. As we talked about in the last episode, when it came to the addiction, we had to come to a very dark place where we felt like we just cannot go, we cannot take any other step, and we are just clueless, we're lost. And then that's when the thoughts, which you would call awareness, started to come in of maybe something is better out there, or am I lying to myself, or what do you think happens when you've reached that dark end?
Well, we, as the Buddha says, the first teaching is that we're suffering, that we suffer as human beings. Animals don't suffer. They experience pain, but I guess some do that are more closely related to human beings, like dogs, but animals are less likely to experience suffering. And suffering is the unneeded emotional anguish. Pain comes and goes, but anguish that comes from identifying with our thoughts about ourselves and who we are and how we relate to the rest of this world, that is suffering. So, since it's really, we're the only living things on this planet that are completely insane to a large extent, you don't see, I mean, you may see chimpanzees kind of having a war with each other, but not destroying the planet and destroying each other like we are. And that's because we identify with the story of ourselves and who we are. And the story of ourselves needs to be in opposition with another group or another person, because it needs to hold up this story of who we are, these thoughts of who we are. So the identification with thoughts are the beginning of I'm coming around to answering your question from from my perspective, but that's the beginning. That disidentification is the beginning of awakening. So what we do to stop suffering, usually most of us, what we start doing is to look for that salvation, that
Mhm.
relief of suffering in the world, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a successful job and money, or it's recognition, or it's having any kind of connection or validation, anything that upholds this sense of self. Like, I have gotten money, now I've got it. Oh, I've had enough sex. Or that's when certain things stop working that seem more wholesome. I think a lot of the times we'll look into things that are more addictive. And addiction, the whole reason that we become addicted, I would say, is because we are trying to relieve the suffering caused by our mind, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, whatever it is. So we try all those things in the world, all those things with relationships, those the addictions, and they stop working. Usually the last house on the block is spiritual awakening. It's like there's got to be some way that I'm causing suffering on myself, and it's taking the attention from outside to looking inward. And how am I creating this suffering myself? Okay, if it's thoughts and emotions, then we start to realize that. Then is there something inside of me that has this salvation, this okayness, this peace, this joy, this love that is there already without me needing to get it from something outside of me. So that's what I believe causes, that's my experience, and that's just what I've seen, can start the spiritual search, which it's the search for how can I find this peace, joy, love inside of me rather than getting it from stuff. That's what I would say. What would you say?
Yeah, I think one of, like, for me, it was more like, if there is a God, help me. That was like I don't understand why. And you don't understand what you're going through because you don't know yourself yet. You don't know the I amness. You don't know the oneness, right? So if there is a God, help me. Why, help me get out of this, because within every single one of us, we still have hope inside, I feel. you know Obviously there's some cases where it gets too late, and then things happen, suicide or whatever, but there's always a point that they ask for, that salvation. And
Mm-hmm.
so that salvation looks different for everyone, but I think ultimately it ends up like the way the salvation is being asked for is the same for everyone, but the way they get it is different. But it comes down to the same thing. It's like exactly what you were saying, is you start going into your own mind, into yourself. It's like the tarot card, the hermit mode, right? The hermit card, where you just close in on yourself, and then you're forced to look at yourself inwardly versus outwardly.
Yeah. So that prayer for help and and that need to meditate, to pray, to do service, to be devoted to, whether it's your guru as they do in the East, or it's a supreme being. All of those things that we do that are spiritual, being in the present moment, stopping, pausing, surrendering, all of those things are under one heading, I would say, and that is self transcendence.
Mhm.
And when I say self transcendence, I am saying transcending, which transcend means to go beyond
Mhm.
that, as you know, the suffering caused by our mind, the thoughts that we have about ourselves and the world, that's what causes the suffering, and that's the self, this ego, which is the story I weave in my mind about myself and how I am separate from everyone else. That ego is what's causing the suffering. And when we're doing all of those things that we do, it doesn't matter what it is spiritually, it's it's a cry out or a practice or a method or a tool to transcend that suffering self. That is what I would say.
And I want to just re-emphasize what you said, self-transcendent, because it is a self journey. And some people have extra support when they're ready for it, but ultimately it is your self journey, which makes it harder um, to go by yourself because you're so used to external things to help you. And not many people can make that transition of changing themselves completely. But it is, to me, it is a self journey, a self inwardly journey that is very difficult, and is probably going to be one of the most difficult things that you go through in your life. And you may have multiple spiritual awakenings throughout your life with the different circumstances. Like, you learn one lesson just to go into another one, right? But it makes you stronger each one. So let's turn it around for the people that have lost their homes or evacuating, which we are, experiencing right now in California. Right now, they're in a state of chaos. They're in a state of distraught. They are just trying to be in survival mode. I don't know if this is considered the bottom point of their life. Everybody's going to be in a different journey, but you already mentioned meditation. You already mentioned breath, to take a breath. And in the very beginning of this, you also said how we can move it to in a positive way. Why is this happening to you, and what can you get out of it? So I don't know if you're ready to go into that.
Yeah,
All right.
well, we're ready. How to get out of it. Okay, so the problem that causes the suffering is identification with our minds and believing our thoughts. So no matter what happens, whether it's this horrible, horrible situation that everybody's going through, that so many people are going through, or it's loss of a loved one, it's divorce, it is, or it's not getting a job that you
Mhm.
want, or somebody giving you you leave the coffee shop and somebody giving you coffee with sugar and you don't want sugar. I'm using anything that we don't like, from the extreme to the things that, and you can notice somebody could have a temper tantrum about getting the wrong coffee, and someone can have their house burned down, which, by the way, I've had happen in my life. My house burned down when about 18 years ago. So, I just saying that I'm speaking from experience. You can notice that someone can be in peace when something horrific happens, and somebody can have a temper tantrum when something relatively small doesn't go their way. So what is it that's causing these emotional reactions, and why is it not that it's completely dependent on the degree to which the severity of the situation is? And the reason is because it's how much we're believing our thoughts. And different minds do different things,
Mhm.
but it's not the situation, it's how we interpret a situation, whether it's a terminal diagnosis or somebody cutting us off in traffic. I'm not minimizing anybody's horrific situation, but what do we do about it? Well, one way to disidentify from our thinking is to accept, and this is the major key for everything, is to accept the situation as it is, because that slows down thoughts right away. And I'm really taking a page out of Eckhart Tolle's book, because he does this so well that I might as well just quote him. He says, what, and I'm inviting anyone who's listening or will be listening to this, what he says is very simple and it's very profound, is what problem do you have at this moment? Not in 15 minutes, not in a few days, not what did happen, but what problem do you have at this moment? When my house burned down years ago, I had to accept that there was nothing I could do about it, accept that there were things that were lost. I am in no way a spiritual giant or an evolved being, but I will tell you that people, when that happened, said that it didn't seem like my house burned down because I did have tools. And well, one thing I needed to do was just get in my car and go see my mother-in-law, because we were staying there that night. And then I needed to take a shower and I needed to go get some toiletries. And so it there was never a problem in the moment. Even when I was running out of the house, it was me having high energy, grabbing a few things and calling 911. It's our story that causes the emotions, and that cause so much suffering. So an emotion should last in evolved, enlightened, awakened human being, which not many of us are, for maybe 90 seconds, they say, at the most. And, emotions come and they go. The way they stay around is and cause this horrific suffering is because we're telling a story to ourselves about the situation. So to answer your question, to surrender and be in the moment, that's a huge tool that has been talked about for millennia.
It's true, and I think it's that 90-second. Depending on who you listen to, I've heard so far consistently 68 seconds. You have like a window of 68 seconds to kind of transmute that emotion. And once you hit the 17-second mark, I mean, I don't know how they figured it out with the science, and this is from Abraham Hicks and other influencers. Um, what the point being is like to get better at controlling these emotions so it doesn't take over your mind, and then you start replaying the same situation over and over again. And it's you have to get better at, when you feel the emotion, delving into it, asking why you feel that way, and being okay with why you feel that way, and letting those emotions pass, letting, like, feeling it. You have every single right to feel those emotions, but don't dwell in it. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, he says, he has a great thing. Oh, his retreats are the same thing. You wake up to the same thing every morning. You do the same thing every morning. You're replaying the past history from the day before, or you wake up thinking about what happened yesterday at work or whatever. So then you are replaying in your mind the same circumstance over and over and over and over again, and you don't give yourself an opportunity to move forward. And that's one thing that's very important when you're just discussing right now, that we need to be the acceptance, accept it, deal with it right then and there. You know, what's the issue now? Like Eckhart Tolle says, can you fix it? Can you not? Accept it. And then every moment is a new moment. And that's really what being present is, right? Is being the acceptance of whatever's happening, and every moment's a new moment, and treating things at that moment. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in a vicious cycle of victimization, or or anger, resentment, disappointment, whatever the case may be.
hmm hmm Yeah, yeah. So it is like you're saying. It's the story that we weave about a situation, and I think you made a really good point. Is almost all the thoughts we thought today are the same thoughts we thought yesterday. You know, and
Mm.
I think, we're throwing statistics, and there's no way to really know this, but like 98% ish, they say, whoever they are,
Right?
that.
We are not experts at this. We're going through our own journey as we speak right now. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's the thing about that you said. Well, the first, just to finish this thought. So 98-ish, 90, who knows? Most of the thoughts we thought yesterday are the same thoughts we thought today. So most of our thoughts are repetitive, and that's why we end up feeling the same pains over and over again. We tell the same stories about, how someone wronged us, or how things uh, were different, or we should have been different. So the really the challenge is to wake up, like you said, to the present moment, to what is, and separate yourself as the awareness from these thoughts, so that we're not completely lost living out the same things over and over again. So, because if we're thinking the same things over again and feeling the same things over and over again, then we're gonna very likely going to have the same life situations come up very similar. That's why we have the same kinds of relationships. We could break up with someone and have a similar kind of relationship with someone else. Not that I would know anything about that, but or the same kind of boss or the same kind of job. It's because we're thinking the same things over and over again. We're taking similar actions, making similar choices, and so we're not growing as people as quickly. So the invitation is to wake up, and that's what awakening is, out of this dream by being here now. One of the ways to do it is to be here now. One of the ways to do it is to accept this moment as fully as you can. Why? Because this story that we identify with ourselves in our minds is one of the ways it stays so active, is to be against anything that's happening. That would be what our ego, which is thoughts that we're not aware of about ourselves in life, that this me that we believe that we are, which is just a story. When we are when we're totally lost in it, we're against things that are happening. And if we can't be against the traffic or against this thing that is horrific or not so good or whatever it is, we'll start thinking about something we wish would have happened in the past, or we'll start weaving a story about what could happen in the future. So what we in is past, future, and this moment should be different. So the way to get out of that is to surrender and accept and be in this moment, I would
and
say.
that is where the spiritual part comes in, because once you start being more present, then you open yourself more to more clarity, and you don't know where this clarity comes from, this intuition, this, like, I guess they say like just knowing, somehow you just know. It all has like this really beautiful transition to becoming a better person, and just your whole life just changes completely. Oh, please. I know it's kind of like it's hard for me to put into words, because my experience was, I mean, I can put my experience into words, because to me it was just a wonderful experience, even though it was as hard as it was. But I truly think that the spiritual awakening is worth it. Whatever is happening, whether you lost your home, people are losing their homes right now, is to invest in yourself. You are your best investment. Invest in yourself and ask yourself questions to become more aware of yourself and your inner thoughts and your inner feelings, and dissect it, like you were saying. So when you went through your spiritual awakening, what came out for you?
Well, I don't know if I want to talk about any kind of awakenings I've had, because it really sounds so douchey to talk about. I had this thing happen to me, and Um, so I'd rather stay away from that, because in the spiritual community, there is a lot of ego and a lot of people talking about their experience that they had, and it's really counterintuitive. So if you are waking up to who you are, which is, when we wake up to who we are, we realize that we're not our minds, we're not our emotions, we're not the story about ourselves. We start to feel very much, instead of better or less than everyone else, that's what our egos, our story of ourselves do. We start to feel humbled and joyful,
Mhm.
and love with other people rather than conflict with other people. We start to feel peace for no reason. So that's, by the way, one of the reasons why we would want to do this, so we're going to be okay no matter what. So then someone who becomes a spiritual teacher comes along and they say, I had this great awakening. I am enlightened. I've had these experiences, and then the person who's listening says, I haven't had those experiences, which they're not even necessary for someone to wake up. Then what it does is it creates that separation that we're trying to get away from as a spirit, in our spiritual practice. So you see someone who's wearing robes, or who may be from the far east, or have their head shaved, or whatever, that they and then we project all these things onto them, to they have something that I don't. But waking up spiritually is realizing that you're just like everybody else. We all have that same knowingness inside of us that is already, always and already joyful, always and already um, peaceful and connected to other people without feeling separated, but feeling love. We all have that in us, and we can experience it right now. Why not experience it right now by taking a couple deep breaths, or just accepting this moment, or just feeling our senses and just being with what is happening right now? We start to, and again, I think the major key is to accept this moment fully as it is. So, spiritual awakening is becoming ordinary. And that's why I don't want to answer that question. Most people will. And most people I really respect that are doing this for a living will talk about their spiritual experiences. But to me, that is a person propping themselves up as something special, whether they know it or not, so much of the time. And we project on someone else, they have something that I don't. And that's strengthening that sense of ego that we're trying to get out of. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I mean, I think I was looking for that answer, so it wasn't douchey at all. Because what you get out of it, I honestly was not thinking about what you were talking about, what others would say, because and now that you said it, and I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. I probably didn't ask it
Oh, I'm
correctly.
not talking about how you were
No,
asking.
no, no, no. No, I'm just saying like you answered it. That's what I'm saying is that you answered the question for me without sounding douchey. Is part of the spiritual awakening, one of the things that you get out of it is a total sense of peace. And oh my God, I mean, I can just having a sense of peace. And then even when you don't feel at peace, because shit happens, life happens, whatever's, and you get all, weirded out or whatever. But coming back to that peacefulness is when you're able to redirect and get back to your state of peace. That's what it is to me. That's what spiritual awakening is. It's just being at peace. As a matter of fact, some of the best teachers out there, whether you're listening to Neville Goddard or Eckhart Tolle or whatever, they tell you to just be in silence. Like, don't even speak about yourself. Don't even talk about it. The best thing to do is to lead by example. So that projection of just, being at peace and finding your joy, even when you're upset for that moment, doing something that will bring you at least one little itty bit of joy, right? That and doing it in silence is people will see that and will feed off of that energy that what they're witnessing. So there is no need to boast about. You're like, oh, I took ayahuasca, and oh my God, I am one with the universe, and I love you, I love everybody, I love the leaves. It's nothing like that. It's just be chill. At the end of the day, you're just chill, accepting the moment for what it is, and then acting accordingly at that moment.
Yeah. 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 So what what uh what is it that we get out of spiritual awakening? Again, it's finding out who you are,
Mhm.
finding out who you are, and who we are is always and already okay. But we're looking for that okayness in the world through people, situations, accomplishments. But I want to share. There's so many versions of this story. There's a teacher, Gangaji, who talks about someone who is um, looking for a diamond, and that diamond is already in their pocket. And Eckhart Tolle talks about there is a beggar that's sitting on an old box, and a stranger comes by, and the stranger says, "What's that?" Well, the beggar says, "Can you spare some change?" And the stranger says, "No, I don't have any change, but what are you sitting on?" He said, "Oh, it's just an old box." And the stranger says, "How long have you been sitting on that box?" He said, "For as long as I can remember." And the stranger says, "Why don't you look inside?" And with disbelief and elation, when he looks inside, he realizes that box is filled with gold. So what he said at the beginning of The Power of Now is, as a teacher, he said, "I am that stranger who's not telling you to look inside a box like the parable, but even closer in yourself." And so, and then he goes on to talk about, if you haven't found the peace, joy, love that is inherently part of your being, then you are looking for scraps of pleasure in the world where you can get it from people, situations. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, from the world, and that we're all beggars when we haven't found that joy within ourselves. So that's the way, the sad state of the human condition is, that we go through life so much of the time looking for something that the world can't give us, which is lasting fulfillment when we have it within ourselves.
I think it's all about instant gratification, right? Which is why we go into the addictions. It's looking for that instant gratification because we're not able to look within ourselves. And instant gratification is not even a band-aid. It just gets you into a deeper hole because it can take over you.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about why does it not work to be able to have something outside of us give us fulfillment. Why does pleasure not give us lasting fulfillment? Whether it's we snort a line of cocaine, we have we have sex with someone, we eat a donut, whatever it is. We're why is it that we're why do you think it is that pleasure that comes and goes doesn't work?
So let me kind of clarify. So there's instant gratification. Let me tell you, when I eat a donut, I am eating the donut and I am loving every single moment of that donut. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go and have the whole baker's dozen to myself. You know what I'm saying? That is not in moderation, as doctors would call, things. Um, you have an intention. So if I'm eating that donut, it's for the intent because I know that I don't have a donut often and I love the donut. And so I'm going to eat it, right? If you have somebody who is sober, and sees in front of them that line of cocaine, they have a big decision to make. Are they willing to fall back into that one moment of pleasure, or are they going to stay sober and turn around the other way to not fall into that trap, right? So forgetting that one moment of pleasure, which will reignite their addiction to cocaine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think you're saying two things. I mean, one thing that you're saying that I kind of want to would love to stay on is you're talking about we it's the state of consciousness that we bring to the enjoyment of something. What I was talking about before was when we're not in a state of consciousness of being present and feeling the joy within ourselves, and we're lost in past and future in our stories, and we're lost in our egos, then that donut, let's just use that as an example, will just be a temporary relief. We use anything we can to numb that feeling of suffering, whether it's
Mhm.
mild or it's extreme. We're using that situation, the experience, whatever it is, to relieve that suffering. But if we're already happy, then we can have a piece of cake or we can have a donut, and we're totally present, and really we experience that so much more with so much more enjoyment, and that feeling of more doesn't come in as much. What I do want to point out from my experience and understanding, and you can tell me what your experience is that pleasure comes and goes. It doesn't mean it's bad or it's evil, but joy, it it's something that is more in us already. It's like the joy that you see in a child, and they may
Mhm.
they may have a temper tantrum, but then it's over a lot quicker than it is with us. But that joy, that experience of connection, that experience that we lost so long ago when we were young, when we were young, we're trying to get that back through spiritual practice, which is to find that the 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 experience of peace and joy and love. And I'm just like to use those three adjectives because that's a lot of what we're looking for, I think, to find what we're looking for and experience. So everything that happens, whether it's sex with our significant other, they're all beautiful things. Eating a piece of cake, having this tea, if as long as we're not dependent on it for our salvation, then it's a beautiful thing. So it's finding we all like being around someone who feels okay and doesn't need something from us, but they have that peace. And I think that's a lot of the time why we like being around certain people and we don't really know why.
Mhm.
It's that thing. So anyway, I just said a lot. Tell me what that brings up for you.
No, I think you're right. And now that you mention it in that way, you don't really hear with teachers. We keep on throwing air quotes around teachers and stuff like that. Teachers really put pleasure in that group. So it's always love, peace, and joy, because those are self fulfilling. When you have that within you, it is forever. Even when you have your moments and challenges, you still go back to those three, and the pleasure just comes and goes, kind of like friends. They come and go. You friends with them for a few years, and then they go our separate ways, and then maybe later on you come back. But the pleasure is really just, it does come and go. And it's so easy to always want the pleasure, because it is the instant gratification that you get. It makes you feel good for that moment. And it's hard for people to separate from that, because when you're feeling crappy, you want to feel good. You want someone, whatever, to make you feel good. So that's why pleasure can be addictive. Is addictive. I'm not going to say it can't be. It is addictive. Who's going to tell me sex isn't good? Right? It's pleasure. So and you hit it right there. The spiritual awakening is really coming to terms with what makes you feel joy, what makes you at peace, where can you be even in your hardest times, where can you go, what can you do to bring you to that peace and love. Now that doesn't mean that everyone, because we're not evolved, I'm not evolved, I'm going to love everybody, but at least I can be at peace with them, whoever that is, or whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So nothing that comes and goes is ultimately real. It's temporary. If we're going to get really, whether it's thoughts, experiences, dare I say, our
I was
bodies,
going to say, are you going to say it?
it
We
it's
change.
it,
We're not real.
it's not. Nothing that comes and goes is real. There's a reality, and that reality that's in me is in you and everyone who's listening, and it's in every form, it's in everything. And that remembrance of that is why we experience love, real
Mhm.
love, the love that doesn't isn't about dependence and that can't turn into the opposite, which is hate at the drop of a hat. So the joy is experiencing that awareness, that ground that we are, and not being not being lost in what comes and goes.
Mhm.
So that is what I would sum up spiritual realization, is to find out who we are prior to what comes and goes. And that's good news. That's good news to find that. And the spiritual practice, whether it's remembering it by stopping, pausing, taking conscious deep breaths, surrendering, praying, being of service, whatever it is, it's to remember who we are, which is that which does not come and go. Um, the there is a place within us that we can find that isn't even afraid of death.
Mhm.
You know, so that's that's the spiritual path. Yeah, it certainly is challenging in my experience, because we're going against that. There's that story of me, that ego that is completely identified with thoughts, that wants to continue to believe that it's real. So when we go against, we take measures to loosen that up, then that part of us that wants to be against life, that just wants to say no to life, it will fight back and want to say no. But what the invitation from spiritual teachings, I think, is to continue to go back to what's real, continue to go back to what you know is true, which is who you are prior to what comes and goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to clarify for those who are kind of new to the spiritual awakening, it's not, it doesn't have to be all woo woo with the meditation and the breath. Anything could be dancing, listening to music, writing poetry, reading a book.
Yeah.
Anything is all part of spiritual awakening. It's all part of finding that inner peace for, the moment. And it again, I don't want to get too into it, but it raises your vibration, it raises your energy, which will give you. Oops, my dog is dropping everything here. Which will give you it's a hit of dopamine. When you find that little joy of something at that moment, it will be a hit of dopamine naturally. So it's finding that little thing that makes you happy at that moment,
Yeah.
and that's part of it.
So being able to just be with whatever's happening. So
Mm-hmm.
if we're walking, we are walking and we know that we're walking. If we are looking at our child, there can be annoyance, there can be a lot of things that come up, but if we're really looking at our child, there's going to be a lot more joy than if we're wishing they could be something different. Another way, another pointer that I think is important is this should be different is our ego identified a sleep state, and this is exactly the way it's supposed to be right now, or this is exactly what it is, and there's nothing I can do about it, whether it's my house burned down, or, and again, I'm speaking from experience, or I didn't get the right coffee that I wanted at Starbucks. So anyway, it's about being fully in what you're in and totally and saying yes to this moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say is a really really helpful pointer.
Yeah, and that's just part of the surrendering process. So, what can we do to circle everything back in? What are the highlights?
Yeah, thank you. So we most of our suffering and perhaps all of our suffering comes from believing our thoughts. And that's the normal state of human beings. That joy that we lost when we were a child is due to believing every thought that goes through our mind. So, why does it cause suffering to believe every thought that goes through our mind? Because our minds are either lost in the future, in some imaginary future, or thinking about a
Mm-hmm.
past, or are interpreting this moment in some sort of way that is likely to be against it in some way. Don't take my word for it. Look into your mind and see if that's true. And so the way out is to disidentify from our minds. The best way to do that is to be in the present moment, which could be surrendering. It could be opening your senses to what's happening, to really see what and to really hear, to witness your mind instead of being lost in it, to witness your emotions rather than being lost in them and letting it go into a story, knowing that emotions come and go, and to center yourself in your body rather than being lost in your mind. Those would be sort of pointers that I would say. So the other thing that I would say is it's not what happens, it's how we interpret what happens. So it's what our mind is telling us that we're believing rather than what, um, because we can be at peace when something horrible happens. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have, if my house is burning down, which is did happen. It doesn't mean that we're not going to feel emotions, but if we're present, the emotions come and go, the thoughts come and go, and we don't get lost in what's coming and going and making a story out of it. So instead, what I would like to invite people to do is to find the treasure that's inside of themselves when we're not believing our thoughts and we're present to ourselves and what's happening rather than just being lost in our minds. And that's the simple spiritual path, that, at least one of them, that I would share. What about you, Nada? What would you
I
say?
think the only thing you hit on all the big points. I think the only thing is that I want to reiterate is it's okay to feel those emotions.
Yes.
You need to feel those emotions. That's part of the healing process. Don't
Yes.
suppress them. Don't ignore them. We're not
Yes.
here to say don't feel them. Absolutely not. On the contrary, go for it. Cry, scream, whatever it is that you need to do. Just don't dwell in it.
And the
Understand.
dwell that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. The dwelling comes from thinking about it over and over rather than feeling it. So emotions are supposed to come and go, and they're there to inform us. And if we feel fully, then we're present. If we're feeling so much of the time a little bit, but we're thinking about it, then something that could have lasted 60 to 90 seconds ends up uh, going on for days,
Yeah,
weeks, months. Yeah.
absolutely. And then, obviously we know the after effects of being dwelling in anger and resentment and all that stuff, that how it affects the body. But at the end of the day, let it all out, feel it, you know, find somebody that you can talk to, whatever, because spiritual awakening is a bitch. I'm not gonna lie. It's tough, and it's an ongoing process. Every day you're working on yourself. Every day you do. For me at least, I never get rest. I have to be aware of my thoughts as much as I can every single day to reprogram myself, reprogram my old thoughts. So but it's a great thing to have when you finally find the peace and the joy within yourself, and it gets easier. So not easy, but I encourage everyone to stick with it, go through it, because it is greener on the other side.
Yeah, yeah. It's a journey you have to take yourself, but it's great to have support from friends, teachers. I didn't put them in air quotes this time. But anyone who is not you, who can be outside of you, that's certainly been my experience to have people who've helped guide me, because it's hard for us to go on this journey alone so much of the time. I mean, even if it's listening to a podcast or it's reading a book,
Right.
whatever it is, there's so much support out there. So yeah, so I just want to send love to everybody, and a special prayer and love sent out to the people who are going through what they're going through in the Palisades and other places.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you. It was great seeing you again. Happy New Year. Thank you for everyone that joined and who will be watching this later on. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Okay, thanks, Nada.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.